thank you all for joining today's webinar to discuss a draft charter for the STRIPE initiative to establish a collaborative community on pharmacogenomics. I'm Cynthia Benz from the Personalized Medicine Coalition, joined by my colleagues here, and we're hosting today's webinar with the American Society of Pharmacovigilance. We're joined by them as well. So first we're going to run through some housekeeping items about how you can participate in the question and answer session. If you are a call-in user, unfortunately you are not going to be able to unmute your line. The only way to unmute your line is through your computer if you joined using the WebEx function. For those of you who did join via WebEx, you have the opportunity to submit questions using the chat feature, which is at the bar on the lower middle side of your screen. You would just need to click on the blue bubble to enter a question, and we will run through those periodically throughout the presentation. If you'd actually like to speak, you have to unmute your line through your computer by pressing the little red microphone with the line through it, which is also in the bar at the bottom of your screen. And you can also exit the webinar that way and send questions directly to us. Your webcam is disabled, so if you're joining us from your pajamas, that's fine. We won't be able to see you. We are, however, recording this, so if you do unmute your line or ask a question and we answer it, it'll be part of the record. The recording is going to be posted to the STRIPE webpage, and the URL is here. If you do have any technical assistance, you can contact us directly two ways. One is using the chat feature, which is the blue comment bubble that I mentioned at the lower middle side of your screen, or email Lindsay Steffens, and her email address is lsteffens@personalizedmedicinecoalition.org. So here is an overview of the agenda that we hope to walk through with you for the next 55 minutes or so. We're going to do some welcome and introductions of both of our organizations and provide a bit of background on how we've come to collectively explore the establishment of a collaborative community for pharmacogenomics. We will walk through an overview of the STRIPE initiative, and we will turn it over to ASP for that purpose, and then we will walk through the draft charter that you all received in advance for the STRIPE initiative, answer any questions, and then conclude as promptly as we can at 4 p.m. Eastern. So from the Personalized Medicine Coalition, the two of us who have been spearheading the engagement for the coalition in PGX are myself, Cynthia Benz, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Public Policy here at PMC. I lead the coalition's engagement with federal agencies, members of Congress, as well as interact with my colleague, David Davenport, in making sure that we're appropriately representing our members' interests. And I'm joined by my colleague, Daryl Pritchard.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Daryl. I'm the Senior Vice President for Science Policy at PMC, helping with all of our efforts in pharmacogenomics in the collaborative community.
And so we know that this invitation for the webinar went out to several hundred organizations and individuals, so we don't expect everyone to know what the Personalized Medicine Coalition is, so we thought it would be helpful to just give some background. PMC has been around for more than 15 years. It's a nonprofit coalition of more than 230 member organizations that span the healthcare spectrum. We have innovators, scientists, patients, providers, and payers. And we conduct our activities through education, advocacy, and evidence development. Collectively, all of our organizations are working to promote the understanding and adoption of personalized medicine concepts, services, and products to benefit patients and the health system. And so for the purposes of this webinar and just in general, we thought it would be helpful for you to know how PMC and its members define personalized medicine. We view personalized medicine, which is often referred to as precision medicine, as an evolving field in which physicians use molecular diagnostic tests to determine which medical treatments will work best for their patients. By combining the data from those tests with an individual's medical history, circumstances, and values, healthcare providers and patients can develop a targeted treatment and plans. And so I'm going to turn it over to Ben and Sarah from the American Society of Pharmacovigilance to introduce themselves.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again to PMC for hosting this webinar and allowing us to be here today. My name is Benjamin Brown, and I'm the Executive Director of the American Society of Pharmacovigilance. In my role, I set our organization's vision, oversee the strategic direction of the society, support our leaders and all initiatives inside of my organization, and single-mindedly focus on accomplishing our mission. Sarah and I are very active in the pharmacogenomics community and currently co-chair the Pharmacogenomics Access and Reimbursement Coalition, where I work with and engage a wide array of stakeholders, including federal payers, commercial payers, researchers, health systems, and international organizations focused on creating new ways of thinking at the intersection of pharmacogenetics testing, value-based care, and health economics. Additionally, I'm an active member on the PGX working group under the ISCC umbrella at the National Human Genome Research Institute. ASP is a national biomedical and healthcare network focused on improving patient outcomes by dramatically reducing adverse drug events. We know this is possible by advancing the practice of personalized medicine for all patients. We know pharmacogenetic testing is a key technology that will help us accomplish our mission. The overarching problem for us is adverse drug events, patient injury caused by use of a medication. Adverse drug events are the fourth leading cause of death in the U.S., and we spend over $500 billion in avoidable costs each year. Side effects from medications are a big contributor to adverse events, and part of the problem is variation in drug response. Personalized medicine should be the standard of care, but there are some barriers preventing its widespread use. So we're excited to be here today to talk about a way we can come together and remove those barriers.
Great, thank you, Ben and Sarah. I'm going to walk through a bit of background on the issue that we're here to address and how PMC actually came to explore the idea of working to establish a collaborative community for PGX. PMC sought a meeting with the Food and Drug Administration, and we held that meeting with CDRH in September of this year. The meeting was really intended to get a sense from the FDA, their rationale for taking some of the actions that they had related to PGX and PGX result reporting, both in the context of the safety communication they issued in October of 2018, and then subsequent actions they took against NOVA, as well as in individual communications with different labs and other organizations. FDA clarified at that meeting that they weren't intending to try to broadly walk back their enforcement discretion over diagnostic tests, and that they were committed to legislative action to really work on issues related to the oversight of genetic test or diagnostic testing. But one of the things that they expressed would be useful is for the community to come together in a way to look toward a moderate to long-term solution to some of the concerns that they had that were related to both the PGX tests themselves, as well as the way that those results were being characterized to determine how to prescribe drugs. So they brought up their strategic priority to participate in 10 collaborative communities by the end of 2020 as a potential opportunity for groups like ours to explore with our members and others outside that are interested in participating. We reported back on that meeting at our September 24th Policy Committee meeting, and one of the action items that we took from that was whether or not PMC members in particular would be interested in us exploring the possibility and understanding better what it would take to get one of these communities off the ground. So there was no objection at the time, so we did reach out to FDA to get a better sense from them on what it would take to establish a collaborative community. They ran through some of the information that's contained in a toolkit that they have made publicly available. They put that toolkit out for comment, and then had finalized that toolkit soon after our meeting with them in September. And it really laid out a roadmap for the way that these types of communities can look to how to come together in a way that establishes trust, open lines of communication, and an ongoing way for all stakeholders to make sure that their voices are heard. As part of those conversations with the FDA, we learned that there was another organization that had already been looking to establish a collaborative community in this area, and that's when we were fortunate to be introduced to Ben and Sarah at ASP. And subsequently, we know that others have expressed interest to FDA in putting together a collaborative community in this area. We've subsequently connected with all of those people as well, and I think that about half of you who are participating on the webinar are actually also involved in learning more about those efforts. So thank you for joining today to learn a bit more about STRIPE. And we also had a subsequent discussion with PMC members at our December 10th Policy Committee meeting, where we not only heard from them on what they potentially would like to see moving forward in a collaborative community, but we also had a presentation from Dr. Tim Stencil at the FDA, where he walked through what the different elements of a collaborative community are and what a collaborative community is and is not. So we're taking that feedback to heart. And so we think that the STRIPE initiative is one that follows very close to what FDA is looking for in a successful collaborative community. So I am going to turn it over to Ben and Sarah to walk through some of the overview of what STRIPE is.
Great. Hi, I'm Sarah Rogers. I'm a founding board member and director at ASP, and my main role is in overseeing the educational and clinical activities of the Society. And we've prepared a short presentation to share some of the background behind the STRIPE initiative and some of the considerations that went into the charter we'll review together during this webinar. So right now we are faced with a changing regulatory landscape that has caused a lot of confusion, concern. There's uncertainty around the circumstances leading to it, and this is impacting patient care. The idea of starting a collaborative community for pharmacogenomics has been suggested to develop solutions in light of these changes. When we ask for clarity, we are given ambiguity, and we have to consider that pharmacogenomics is complex and regulators may not have all the answers. Creating a collaborative community gives us an opportunity to come together to find answers and engage regulators as we work together to resolve challenges in the field. A collaborative community is a continuing forum where public and private sector members work together to achieve common objectives and leverage collective opportunities. The Center for Devices and Radiological Health has set a strategic priority to participate in 10 collaborative communities by the end of 2020. As per their toolkit, they suggest forming a collaborative community when challenges are ill-defined or there is no definition or consensus on the definition of challenges, if partners are interrelated and want to optimize efforts. This would include preventing the duplication of efforts, and if better outcomes could be achieved by integrating different perspectives, experiences, resources, and expertise. They differentiate a collaborative community from other efforts, such as working groups or task forces, in that these typically address narrowly defined problems and disband after developing a final deliverable. Collaborative communities, according to CDRH, are meant to include expansive membership, not just experts in a specified area of practice, and are intended to be sustaining entities with a broad focus. The question is, how can we utilize this concept of collaborative community to meet the needs of all the healthcare sectors that stand to benefit from the advancement of personalized medicine? And really, there is no limit to what we could accomplish by coming together at this level. We've been successful as an industry at identifying the high-level problems and barriers to implementation of pharmacogenomics in the clinic. If we could break down those problems into actionable tasks, we could work together to develop solutions and create meaningful change. The current regulatory landscape leads to clear, immediate priorities for specific sectors and for the community as a whole. In addition to addressing these short-term goals, we could also lay a foundation to address larger problems and new challenges that arise as the field advances. This will only serve to improve our position and strategically align with one another's efforts to bring higher quality care to patients. Anyone could start a collaborative community for a given medical device using the concepts that CDRH has laid out, and their participation in the process isn't a requirement. But in this case, since we seek to harmonize and optimize standards, practices, and resources, it would be great to get their insight, the insight from CDRH moving forward. And essentially, this could give us ongoing feedback on solutions as we develop them through the initiative. And although not guaranteed, this would make it easier for FDA to leverage these solutions. According to their website, there are some things that are clearly very important as they review charters. Is there a governance structure? Is there a convener, or in this case, co-conveners? Is there a plan to measure success? Is there a mechanism for sustained engagement? So having these components helps CDRH determine whether they will decide to participate. If they do participate, it would be as an active and contributing member, and they've made it very clear that they do not lead or organize these efforts. However, there does need to be a pathway for their member to participate. So then what is the role of ASP and PMC in co-convening a collaborative community for pharmacogenomics? Our role in this is really organizing and facilitating an industry-wide effort to create a path towards solutions and a cross-sector mechanism to address challenges in pharmacogenetic testing. We've developed a framework that has a well-defined structure and equal opportunities for participation. We seek to encourage a diverse multi-stakeholder perspective and moving forward to create an environment of trust and transparency, as well as to maintain objectivity throughout the course of the initiative. The STRIPE initiative is a continuing forum where public and private sector members work together to achieve common objectives and leverage collective opportunities to accelerate the development of personalized medicine practices as a standard of care. The vision is to unite key stakeholder groups to harmonize and optimize standards, practices, and resources related to pharmacogenetic testing. And again, bringing different groups to the table to help develop solutions makes them more likely to adopt those solutions. So in addition to regulators, this includes physician and patient groups. The overall goal is to improve access to safe, accurate, and reliable information about a patient's medication and drug-gene interactions. The initiative serves as a mechanism for cross-sector communication, and the priorities and outcomes of the community will really be shaped by member participation and feedback. Regarding the structure of STRIPE, strategic and operational goals are set by the steering committee. The steering committee also establishes new subcommittees and approves subcommittee members. There are 9 proposed subcommittees of the steering committee, which we've talked about having, and those are technology, regulatory affairs, evidentiary standards, information systems, clinician affairs, patient advocacy, access and equity, communications, international affairs, and consensus development. If you were to go online and register to participate, you would be able to see a breakdown of the objectives for the subcommittees. Each of the subcommittees is essentially focused on a certain set of issues to identify specific challenges, define the components of the challenges, and identify opportunities to collectively resolve challenges. Each of the subcommittees will appoint a delegate to serve on an advisory board. This group will summarize committee activities to present to the steering committee in determining a priority level and immediate and long-term impact of potential solutions. If it's determined that a consensus is needed, an expert panel will then be formed and they would go through a consensus development process. After a consensus is reached, it would then go through a validation and feasibility process. There is also a general committee, which is open to all stakeholders, and this group would get ongoing correspondence regarding STRIPE and learn about new opportunities to participate. The initial steering committee will really be pivotal in engaging stakeholder groups to follow the initiative and to participate in the initiative. So that's something we're considering as we slate these initial 20 seats. Some of the cornerstones to the steering committee are rotating leadership, term limits, and diverse representation from different sectors, and that's reflected in the charter. There will be an executive committee on the steering committee, which will consist of 2 co-chairs, a vice chair, treasurer, and secretary. The steering committee will oversee the entire operation of the initiative. Responsibilities would include appointing subcommittee members, approving new subcommittees, working groups, and task forces as needed, and also to engage with regulators, payers, and policymakers regarding STRIPE. Additional tasks that I think will be key for the initial steering committee might include advising on governance policies, approving an SOP, and developing a sustainability plan. It's also essential that steering committee members secure buy-in on the direction of STRIPE from their larger communities. If you are interested in learning more about serving on the steering committee, you can indicate that on the registration form. We will continue to have short calls with candidates to talk more about what serving on the steering committee would entail, expectations, and to answer any questions. Goals and objectives will be developed by stakeholders through their feedback, and that is why it is so important to participate, because we are taking everything into consideration as we lay the foundation for the initiative. In determining milestones and long-term goals, we're also looking closely at impact on patient care and potential to improve adoption levels of pharmacogenomics in practice. Transparency and objectivity are of the highest importance in organizing this effort. Meeting notes and participant lists will be publicly available. Calls will be recorded starting with this call and be made available. Members are required to list their affiliations and notify us of any conflicts of interest regarding specific activities as they arise, and in addition to annually. This will be clearly defined in a memorandum that we will require in order to participate at any level. We will not list anyone as supporting or participating in the initiative until we've received that signed memorandum. So the star of the show today is the STRIPE Charter. The charter is just a formalization of the existence of the initiative and provides specificity and clarity on our objective, structure, and function. I think that CDRH has really given us a great gift in developing the collaborative community toolkit, and we're thankful to them for all of their work in doing that. As mentioned, anyone could start a collaborative community, and while it may not be essential, it would be extremely helpful to have a mechanism for ongoing or even real-time feedback on solutions as we develop them through the initiative. That being the case, we'd like to submit a charter that is likely to garner participation from their group and which is reflective of our goals to create a platform that is not only all-inclusive, but which has clearly delineated roles and responsibilities and is well-positioned to drive solutions in the field. We'll walk through the charter. A final copy of the charter will be disseminated and will also be made publicly available on a dedicated website for STRIPE. We acknowledge that we may not get 100% concordance on every component of the charter, but we will review all the comments and submit a charter that is the most representative of the goals of the initiative and our commitment as convening organizations to ensure the success of these efforts. Also, keep in mind that this charter will be reviewed and updated by the steering committee at least annually, so it's likely to grow and change as the needs of the community change over time. And thank you to everyone who has already signed up to participate. If you're ready to take action, we have an interim page on the ASP website which you can visit to register for the initiative. Everything will soon be moved over to a dedicated STRIPE website. The general committee, again, is open to all stakeholders, and it's a great option if you have limited bandwidth. Highly recommend everyone register. You'll be updated regularly via email. We're planning on quarterly open forum discussions, and you would also be notified of opportunities to participate in task forces and working groups as they arise, as well as related events and webinars. So with that, I'll turn it over to PMC to talk a little bit more about the charter.
Great. Thank you very much, Sarah. We appreciate it. And I will preface this by saying there are a number of people on the line that opted just to call in and not join via WebEx, and we are going to walk through the various sections of the charter. So in some cases, I'm going to read, so I apologize to those of you who did join directly through the WebEx and have this in front of you. But the copy that was sent in advance of the STRIPE charter it should also be available to you for review as well. And the idea to to present the charter in this way came as a result of a call that we had with a smaller group of you about 3 weeks ago, where everyone felt it would be helpful to see just how Stripe would work, not only in structure, but what the governance would look like. And you'll be pleased to know that this charter is actually modeled off of a charter that was submitted for the NEST Coordinating Center, which those of you who have been following the collaborative communities know that this was the first collaborative community that FDA did deem something that they would want to participate in. So the model for both the governance and convening structure that this charter would take is very much a successful model. It also includes several of the elements that were mentioned by Sarah, but were also raised during Dr. Stenzel's presentation at the PMC Policy Committee meeting last week, which is that for FDA to consider their participation, the main things that they're looking for in a successful charter is that the collaborative community has a governance structure, that it has an identified convener, in this case co-conveners, that it has a mechanism for sustained engagement, as well as a mechanism for measuring success. So with that, the first section of the charter is the section that lays out the name, preamble, and mission for the STRIPE initiative. The name, as Sarah mentioned, is Standardizing Laboratory Practices in Pharmacogenomics. Hereafter, we're going to refer to it as the STRIPE initiative. It is a joint effort of the American Society of Pharmacovigilance and proposing that it's co-convened by the Personalized Medicine Coalition, and this just states that we are both nonprofit organizations incorporated in our respective states and the District of Columbia. The second section, the preamble, it says that several categories of the document will govern STRIPE activities, duties, and responsibilities. STRIPE-specific documents may include, but may not be limited to, a STRIPE governance policy, standard operating procedures. If there are any perceived inconsistencies between these two documents, the charter governs. In addition, STRIPE at all times will be subject to applicable provisions of the Articles of Incorporation of both ASP and PMC. And this language directly reflects what's also included in the NEST Coordinating Committee charter. Now, for the mission and vision, this is different from, obviously, the NEST Coordinating Committee. It's to accelerate the development of precision, also called personalized medicine, practices as a standard of care. And our vision is to unite patients, providers, industry, regulators, payers, and other key stakeholders to harmonize, optimize standards, practices, and resources related to pharmacogenomic testing that will improve access to safe, accurate, and reliable information about a patient's medication and drug gene interactions. And we really see this as an opportunity to leverage already existing resources. And so if the collaborative community deems that it's important to build on existing resources in this space, that's obviously something that will be considered, because we know that there is and will continue to be a lot of work in this area. So Article 2 is related to the steering committee. Sarah had outlined in her overview that the steering committee plays a significant role and has a number of different responsibilities. The steering committee supports the establishment and maintenance of STRIPE and recommends strategic and operational goals and STRIPE policies. Members of the steering committee will be responsible for representing and securing buy-in from larger communities on the direction of STRIPE. The steering committee is also responsible for establishing new subcommittees, approving subcommittee members, with the intent to ensure a distributed leadership of STRIPE, and approving new STRIPE opportunities for public or targeted announcements. The steering committee members must attend 75% of the governance committee meetings, and this is something that's actually reflected in the NEST Coordinating Committee charter as well. In terms of membership on the steering committee members can serve for up to 3-year terms and may be reappointed for an additional term by ASP and PMC. Initial steering committee members who decide to serve for a second term shall have staggered terms of 1, 2, or 3 years as determined by drawing of lots. Subsequent steering committee members will serve the standard 3-year terms. Representatives from the FDA, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, ASP, and PMC are exempt from term limits. as long as they have approval from our respective organizations. The composition of membership. As Sarah mentioned, there's going to be 20 members on the steering committee, and it's going to be representing a diverse range of stakeholders, including but not limited to patients, clinicians, manufacturers, regulators, health systems, trade associations, professional societies, clinical guideline developers, and payers. And this is something that's been reiterated a number of times by the FDA, is that to the extent that these collaborative communities could be as all-inclusive as possible, that is their preference. So you'll notice that we wanted to make sure that all of those stakeholders are represented. 2 seats are reserved for patient organizations. FDA, CMS, ASP, and PMC will each recommend a member. Industry representation on STRIPE's steering committee must make up no more than 35% of the steering committee membership. So those of you who are not great at math, like me, that 7 seats on the steering committee can be representatives of industry. And this is something that PMC actually asked for. It was an increase in the number of seats that could be considered. Initially, it was a quarter of the steering committee and no more, but we thought to make sure that there was adequate representation of all stakeholders that number we might want to increase that number. So I wanted to make note of that. And ASP was open to making that change for us. The selection process for members, this is something that's actually been raised a couple of times. Folks felt that there might be some ambiguity on how it would be considered. The remaining seats on the steering committee will be filtered through an open nomination process and review. The executive committee is going to put forward recommendations for steering committee members for approval to ASP and PMC, and makes recommendations for filling additional seats and renewing terms. Approval of the recommended members by ASP and PMC shall only be withheld for good reason, and such reasons shall be discussed with the steering committee before a final decision's been made. Co-chairs may defer discussing and voting on nominations at their discretion to future meetings, so long as nominations are reviewed and voted on at least once per year. There will be regular meetings of the steering committee, at least 4 times per calendar year, in person or remotely. And special meetings of the steering committee may be called at any time by the steering committee co-chairs. Notice of the time and place of each meeting will be provided to each steering committee member at least 3 days in advance of the meeting. Representatives from FDA and CMS may also request the co-chairs to call a special meeting. Though we know from FDA that they infrequently do that because they don't actually dictate what the collaborative communities do. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Okay. I'm going to keep going, but again, if you have any questions on anything that we're running over, just look to the bottom in the chat box and type in a question or unmute yourself. So Section 7 refers to a quorum. The steering committee, subcommittees, and working groups will seek to reach decisions collaboratively and through consensus. When a vote's taken, except in those instances when a higher level threshold to meet a quorum is required, simple majority of the steering committee, subcommittee, or working group members at a meeting at which a quorum is present is required to approve an action. Quorum is achieved if greater than 50% of steering committee members are present. If the steering committee is voting to amend the charter, elect new co-chairs, a vice chair, treasurer, secretary, or approve the addition of a new steering committee member, 2/3 of the steering committee members must be present to meet the quorum thresholds for such a vote. And the language referring to a quorum mirrors what was included in the NEST coordinating committee charter as well. So that's something that that was not dictated specifically by us. That's something that has actually been considered by FDA and approved. Section 8, actions of the steering committee. Until such time, if at all, the STRIPE becomes a separate legal entity, the steering committee serves in an advisory capacity, except to the extent that the steering committee is authorized by ASP and PMC to take action on specific or general matters. The steering committee's actions will be consistent with the mission and vision of STRIPE. The steering committee will review the steering committee charter and the STRIPE strategic and operational plan on an annual basis. Both will then be submitted to ASP and PMC for consideration and approval. In addition, the steering committee will advise in the development of the selection process for a STRIPE sustainability plan. There will be one submitted to ASP and PMC for consideration and approval. And then with respect to resignations, steering committee members may resign at any time by providing written notice to the steering committee co-chairs. The next section is related to vacancies, and we're on section 10. For those of you who are following along not on the WebEx, vacancies will be filled using the same selection process noted above. Steering committee members who fill a vacant seat will serve out the remainder of that term and will then be eligible to serve one additional term, provided it is approved by ASP and PMC. And conflicts of interest, this is something Sarah alluded to. Disclosure statements are to be completed by all steering committee members once a year and are to be made available on the Stripe public website. If a new conflict of interest arises during the time between annual disclosure, it's an obligation of the steering committee member to provide an update to their disclosure statement. There are conflict of interest disclosure statements that are a part of the 2 existing collaborative communities, and we envision something similar to those which are publicly available for participation in this effort as well. We're now in Article 3, committees, subcommittees, and task force and working groups. Section 1, executive committee section. The composition. The executive committee is composed of the steering committee co-chairs, vice chair, treasurer, and secretary. The executive committee will be comprised of representatives from at least 2 different stakeholder groups and will meet on an ad hoc basis. The responsibilities of the executive committee are to review nominations for the co-chairs, vice chair, treasurer, and secretary, and present a slate to the steering committee. Assess the composition of the steering committee and put forward recommendations for steering committee members who add diverse perspectives, knowledge, and skills for approval to ASP and PMC, and make recommendations for filling additional seats and renewing terms. And to annually review Stripe policies to ensure the performance of programmatic duties without conflict of interest or the appearance of conflicts of interest that could arise as Stripe develops standards for companies that are members of the Stripe steering committee. In the event that such policies are not in place, the executive committee will make recommendations to ASP and PMC for the establishment of such policies. Section 2, subcommittees, task force, and working groups. Sarah walked through the 9 different subcommittees and working groups that were envisioned. The subcommittees, task force, and working groups can be established by the steering committee on an ad hoc basis in furtherance of Stripe's approved plans. The purpose and composition of the groups is subject to approval by the steering committee. Term lengths for internal subcommittees will align with the subcommittee members' terms on the steering committee. Term lengths for external subcommittees, working groups, and task force will be determined by the steering committee. In general, working groups and task force will have a time-limited engagement. The steering committee has the authority to dissolve and end the work of these groups. Okay. Still don't have any questions at this point. Article 4, officers. Section 1, steering committee officers. The officers of the steering committee shall be the co-chairs, vice chair, treasurer, and secretary. The current co-chairs may invite a previous co-chair to serve on the steering committee and executive committees in an honorary and advisory capacity. Chair emeriti do not count toward the number of committee members and do not have voting power. Section 2 is election and terms. Co-chair, vice chair, treasurer, and secretary are selected through a nomination process that may include self-nominations. Nominations made by others will be accepted if the individual nominated agrees in advance to serve if selected. Nominations are reviewed by the executive committee, which discusses and provides a slate for the steering committee to approve. Individuals must have served on the steering committee for at least 1 year prior to being nominated for co-chair, vice chair, treasurer, and secretary. All 4 positions serve 1 to 2 year terms, and the term is not renewable. Resignations and vacancies. Resignations and vacancies shall be handled the same process outlined for the steering committee, resignations and vacancies. Section 4, co-chairs. The co-chairs are responsible for working collaboratively to set steering committee agendas, engaging with key stakeholders to help ensure Stripe's success in meeting key milestones, presiding over steering committee meetings, serving on and chairing the executive committee, and overseeing the direction and coordination of any subcommittees and working groups. Section 5, the vice chair. The Vice Chair is responsible for engaging with key stakeholders to help ensure Stripe's success in meeting key milestones, presiding over steering committee meetings in the absence of a chair, becoming a co-chair upon completion of a 2-year term as Vice Chair or in the event of an unplanned vacancy of a co-chair position, and serving on the Executive Committee section. The Treasurer is responsible for providing in-depth feedback on Stripe's budget. At this point, there is not a budget, so that would be an easy job at first. Overseeing the development of operating budgets and fundraising efforts, including the development of protocols and best practices, and serving on the Executive Committee. Section 7, the Secretary. The Secretary is responsible for making recommendations to the Committee for coordination of subcommittee activities related to the development of knowledge, assets, and intelligence, and disseminate this intelligence to stakeholders. Receiving and planning agenda items in conjunction with committee members, and to take the minutes of the meeting and ensure that agreed upon actions are carried out, and serving on the Executive Committee section. Article 5, the structure. As we said earlier, Stripe would be a joint program of ASP and PMC. A representative from each ASP and PMC will serve as Stripe's initial co-chairs. Stripe's organizational structure will consist of a steering committee, which is an advisory committee established by ASP and PMC, subcommittees, which may be established by the Stripe Steering Committee. Working groups composed of experts representing diverse perspectives may be established by the Steering Committee on an ad hoc basis. Section 1, ASP and PMC. These would play out. Someone have a question? Hello? Okay, well, I'll go on until someone does ask that question. ASP and PMC would be responsible for providing financial and general oversight of Stripe, overseeing compliance of Stripe activities with ASP and PMC's charitable mission as tax-exempt status. Is something that we look at as being very important to our ability to conduct our work. Our governing documents and determining what authority to delegate to the steering committee and to undertake Stripe-related activities. We'd also administer the conflicts of interest policies and periodically review and suggest modifications as needed. For dispute resolution, in the event that the steering committee, ASP, or PMC determines that communication among the 3 parties is necessary or appropriate with respect to a disputed issue for which ASP or PMC has authority, the ASP and PMC Stripe Executive Committee will hold a joint meeting to discuss the issue. Each of the 3 entities shall have a vote, with the final determination decided by a simple majority of the votes. And then the final article is on amendments, and the charter will be reviewed and approved by the steering committee on a no less than annual basis. So that is the charter. Does anyone have any questions at this point?
There was one question from Annette Taylor.
Yeah, I can ask it verbally.
Great.
Cynthia, all of you, how many members have joined this version of a PGX collaborative community separate from the Stripe initiative that launched on October 16th? And how much input have they had as individual members on this charter?
So I can answer from PMC's perspective. Our involvement up until this point has been exploratory, so we have not asked our individual PMC members to join the Stripe initiative. We wanted to make sure that we did due diligence as the convener of the Personalized Medicine Coalition to understand if our members had any concerns with the Stripe initiative. And so far, the feedback that we've received is that if PMC were to take this co-convening role, that the one step that would be important for our members to see us take as a coalition is to make sure that the coalition adequately has scoped out what we would like to see the goals for the Stripe initiative to achieve, to make sure it's in line with what PMC historically has done in this space and will continue to do moving forward. But Ben and Sarah, I'll turn it over to you to see if anyone from PMC's membership has expressed an interest to you in joining or serving in any of the leadership capacities.
Ben?
Ben,
Yeah,
Sarah?
just like how many members are in this community signed on so far? That's the general question.
Sure. So Sarah and I have personally spoken with well over 40 professionals, some of which are on this phone call, others of which have not, that have expressed interest in varying degrees of serving in either a leadership role on the steering committee, as well as participating in various subcommittees and in the general committee. And so the degree and level of participation, has been diverse, as there are diverse ways to participate in the community. I hope that helps.
This is Tom Sparkman with the American Clinical Laboratory Association. Just to kind of follow up on Annette's membership question, how many individuals or organizations would you say are committed? I mean, you just said there's a diversity of interest levels as part one, and then two, if you could discuss the absence of clinical laboratories as one of the necessary stakeholders in the steering committee as well, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. I would feel confident in saying the commitment to participate in the STRIPE initiative, removing or not counting professional laboratories or clinical laboratories, is still well over 20, and that would comprise payers, patient advocacy groups, health systems, pharmacists, patient advocacy organizations, as well as other medical associations and organizations.
Is a list available to understand what other interests are coming to the table?
Right. So we have a pretty thorough opt-in process that we require. So even although there are people that have registered, we're still not going to list people until they've signed a memorandum and that we're going to work through with PMC also before we would list anyone. But once all that process has gone through, we will be listing everyone on the website that's participating. So you will know very well who is and who isn't participating.
But in terms of considering whether to be a participant or a member and to understand the community that I would be applying to join and the dynamics of that community, would you disclose it to an organization that's considering joining as opposed to just having to wait until it's public information?
Right. But yeah, that's just our process for that, and if that's something you're waiting on to decide to participate, then we can discuss, how best to disseminate that information.
Okay, and then the second part about the absence of clinical laboratories being mentioned as a necessary stakeholder as they both perform and develop pharmacogenetic testing.
Yep. To be clear, when I responded to the question the first time, I removed the number of laboratories we'd spoken with to address the question, but there are clinical laboratories that specialize in pharmacogenomics that we have spoken with leaders of those organizations that have expressed their interest and desire to participate in the STRIPE initiative, some of which may be on this phone call, others of which may not be attending this phone call.
And Tom, I would mention that we did ask for adding trade association and professional societies. So if ACLA were interested in potentially nominating themselves for participation in the steering committee, you as a association representing all those interests would be open for consideration.
Sure. I'm not sure that the point is driving home here, in that clinical laboratories are generally the ones who develop and very much perform these tests. And the fact that the charter doesn't mention them at all, is a little concerning, that perhaps, that's not even being considered the individuals who have to stand up and operate on a daily basis these tests. I mean, just as a facial concern, as a steering document, I understand this is 50,000-foot level and is not supposed to be all-inclusive, but just from an optics perspective, that that's facially troubling. I mean, that's my point. It's not whether you've talked to labs. It's just, you know, there's an optics issue there. I mean, never mind, you know, the actual need to include people who actually conduct and do the test and have experience in validating the test, et cetera.
How would you recommend or perceive that we include laboratories into the charter as we presented to you today?
So you mentioned manufacturers, you know, on Section 3 of Article 2. It's, you know, it just seems like a glaring absence that laboratories aren't there. And then just another point is that this is an FDA collaborative community initiative, at least that's my understanding. And then, you know, it's alongside payers, and payers is outside the scope of FDA policy, generally speaking. So, you know, I just have questions about the constitution of, you know, of the membership of this, you know, as a starting point.
Sure. The diversity of the stakeholder groups that we chose to include not only in the drafting of this document, but for general inclusion in the community, or taken directly from the guiding documents, you know, provided in the FDA Collaborative Community Toolkit. And so we're just working from the guidance that had been provided to try and create, you know, as an inclusive as possible community.
Hi everyone, it's Annette again. Just as a historic point, I noticed that the wording of the steering committee section of this charter is exactly word for word of the wording of the STRIPE initiative that launched on October 16th. And what are the plans? It's as though this community has just embraced exactly that STRIPE initiative. And so the concern is, has there been input from other groups into this piece of this document? And then also the governance, I'll just throw that in, is that the FDA toolkit very clearly says, while the leadership of a collaborative community is typically distributed among all members and not hierarchical, the community may have a convener. And then they go on a whole paragraph about how it's better to have it not have control from the top. And this charter is very hierarchical, with the steering committee and PMC and the STRIPE group, the ASP, having really most of the control on who can join, and then, you know, just a lot when you read this charter. It's not like polling all the members for input. What are your thoughts? How did you choose this type? Yeah.
So Annette, just to go back to the beginning of the presentation, walking through the charter, it was modeled off of the charter of the first collaborative community that was approved by FDA for their participation. So the exact steering committee governance structure and the way that it's formed is in direct concordance if you looked at the charter for the NEST coordinating committee. To the second point, in terms of soliciting feedback from the larger community, it's exactly what PMC has been working to do, both in our first presentation to the community that Matt Rutledge has pulled together, where we had a conference call on November 21st, when we've presented this idea now twice to PMC's membership, and now through this opportunity to publicly respond to questions. So we appreciate that folks like Tom are giving us concrete examples of areas where we may have either fallen short of being as inclusive as we need to be, and also to get feedback from you on any additional ways that you believe that, you know, this may or may not be achieving the goals that you would be interested in seeing out of a collaborative community.
Thanks, Cynthia. Appreciate that. I mean, maybe
Absolutely.
Matt could say something about the other community that has a lot of members as well, which is very democratic.
Hey, Matt? Matthew Rutledge, Matt? Okay. Thank you, Cynthia, for pulling this together and for illuminating the STRIPE goals and initiatives. I think fundamentally, there's a larger group that is composed right now of that came primarily out of the CPIC implementers call several months ago. It's researchers, hospital systems, implementers, a lot of laboratories, the clinical decision support software companies, patient groups, patient consultants, all types of groups. And we're trying to engage with the FDA because timing seems to be pretty vital. We think that they are going to issue some additional guidance in the coming months, and we'd like to have this collaborative community have an impact on that guidance, at least work on it together with stakeholders versus what they've done in the past, it seems, and suspend a lot of testing. So we're trying to gel this together. I think there are two prevailing ideas about how to do that. One is as a democratic community that would like the STRIPE, PMC, and ASP leadership involved. And the other is this that appears to, and tell me if I'm wrong, take the collaborative community and make it a subcommittee of STRIPE with PMC and ASP primarily driving who the members are, when the meetings are, what the agenda is. So tell me if I understand the larger situation appropriately, or if there's something I'm missing.
So Matt, this is Daryl Pritchard with the Personalized Medicine Coalition. That isn't an accurate description of what we're trying to do here. By all means, we are hoping to set up a democratic group collaborative community as well. We're just trying to set up how the organizational structure at this point will be formulated so that we can go through the process of recognition and inclusion of the FDA. Definitely want inclusion of all of the members from CPIC, everybody on this call to be a part of this collaborative community and do it. This is just an organizational and leadership structure proposal for which we are amenable to suggestions and by and large want to make sure that it's democratic.
And Matt, the one item that I would also add to what Daryl laid out in response to the description of the activities for the community that you've been working with, when Dr. Stencil presented at our policy committee meeting last week, he explicitly said that the collaborative communities don't exist to advise the FDA, and that they're not task force or working groups, and ultimately that they are not going to be a vehicle for developing guidances or suggesting guidances that would be useful for the agency. So if those are activities that your group is participating in, it's not something that an actual collaborative community is intended to do.
Well, what is the collaborative community under the STRIPE initiative going to do, if not advise or communicate with the FDA on getting things, getting policy affected? What is the goal of it? It's not stated in the charter, as I can see.
So some of the potential outcomes of a collaborative community, I believe we're still sharing my screen at this point, so I just put up the slides that Tim presented. So the various working groups and subcommittees, these are the types of outcomes that a collaborative community can actually achieve. And for those of you who aren't on the webcast portion, I'm just going to read through these. The collaborative community could develop research agenda or specific projects, publish peer-reviewed publications, develop tools, best practices, templates or frameworks, inform healthcare and coverage reimbursement decisions, also develop white papers.
So this is Tom to jump in. I mean, does ASP and PMC have, concrete, tangible, choices out of these that they've whittled down to as to what, they think that STRIPE's first product should be, work product should be, or is it still sort of a TBD scenario amongst these?
Yeah, Tom, it's definitely TBD. We're just trying to get buy-in from everybody and get this set up. That's the first order of business, how to prioritize what we can and should be doing. And as mentioned in my response to Annette and Matt, we want this to be democratic, of course. We want to hear from everybody in the community on what we should be doing first.
Well, Matthew again here. Sorry, the democracy piece of it, I'm not sure that what this charter doesn't lay out is that PMC and ASP are in charge of everything.
I think we're just in charge of getting the structure set up and sort of recognized by FDA. With your help, Matt, and with the help of all those that have approached FDA to form a collaborative community, we want to work with you, but we're just taking a leadership role in trying to get this organized.
Well, as far as the steering committee goes, it seems like it's pretty well. It's a third industry, which is great. A third ASP PMC members, and then another third, it sounds like, to be determined.
Well, seriously, this is Ed Agrans. PMC is open to anybody, so that's not a problem.
As I think ASP is too.
Yeah.
So is ASP. We're welcome to all stakeholders in pharmacogenomics, and we believe that the framework that we presented creates an actionable structure that allows us to move forward, realizing that at any given point in time, some people will be carrying out a more time-intensive, leadership-oriented role, and other people that have limited bandwidth who still want to participate will have the opportunity to participate in a manner that suits their abilities. And so our role in convening truly is that of a trusted intermediary and a connective tissue among all stakeholders in pharmacogenomics, so that we can determine together, how we can create some very specific outcomes to some very specific questions. That's the role of the community.
And I'd just like to call on Stephen Wicks. Stephen, if you're still on the line, I know you had a couple of questions, and we want to make sure that we hear you before time runs out.
Oh, he's just dialed and he's not on computer. Can we read his question?
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? I see that there was one question from someone earlier related to PMC participation and who that would be. We envision that the PMC representative would be someone from PMC staff, so either Daryl or myself.
Mm-hmm.
So is
Now, I have one last question. Should I go ahead as we're leaving? There was a Stripe committee objectives paperwork that was sent out on October 16th that has a great many goals, many of which sound rather regulatory of labs. Is that objective list something that this charter and group is meaning to follow, or is that now not relevant to this? And
well, from PMC's perspective is that the goal of the working groups and the steering committee are to define what those goals and objectives are. So we do not believe at this point that any of those are predetermined.
Right, it's proposed, so this would also be approved by the first steering committee, and they're really overseeing the direction of the initiative. So I hope that answers your question.
That's good.
Okay. All right. Well, we are 5 minutes over. Thanks to all of you who were patient and stayed on the line. Our closing slide includes Daryl and my contact information, as well as Ben and Sarah's contact information. If there are any remaining questions, or if you want to go back and listen to the recording again and any questions that come from that, please feel free to send all that information to us. And I would just close by saying PMC is very excited about this opportunity, and we look forward to continue to engage in the collaborative community effort as it moves forward, and we hope all of you feel the same way and will consider joining. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon, and happy holiday season if we don't talk to you.
Thanks, Cynthia. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.